Trump halts his Cadillac one motorcade for a homeless elderly woman, and what he does next will inspire millions. The motorcade came to an abrupt halt, causing a ripple of confusion among the guards and drivers. Donald Trump, seated comfortably in his Cadillac one, noticed something others ignored: a frail elderly woman standing by the road, clutching a tattered bag, her eyes filled with a mix of despair and resilience. The world outside the bulletproof glass seemed like another reality, but what he saw compelled him to act. "Stop the car," Trump ordered, his tone firm yet calm. His chief security officer hesitated, unsure if this was part of some larger plan. "Sir, are you sure we're on a tight schedule?" Trump didn't flinch. "I said stop the car." The motorcade came to a complete standstill, drawing curious gazes from onlookers and passers-by. The elderly woman, startled by the sudden attention, tried to step away, thinking she was in trouble, but Trump had already stepped out. His towering figure cast a shadow over the pavement. "Ma'am," he said gently, walking toward her, "are you all right? Do you need help?" She looked up, unsure of how to respond. "I'm fine," she mumbled, though her trembling hands told a different story. "Just waiting for the bus." Trump noticed her shoes, worn to the sole, and the small bag she held tightly as if it contained her entire world. "No one should have to wait like this," he said, his voice carrying an uncharacteristic softness. He gestured to one of his guards, who quickly brought a bottle of water and a warm blanket from the trunk. As Trump handed the items to her, the woman hesitated. Her pride battled with her evident need. "Why would someone like you care?" she finally asked, her voice breaking. Trump smiled faintly. "Because I've had everything, but that doesn't mean I've forgotten what it's like to have nothing." Unbeknownst to them, a small crowd had gathered, whispering in awe. People began recording the scene, their phones capturing an interaction no one expected to see. Trump, a man often criticized for his arrogance, was now kneeling to talk to a woman the world ignored. What happened next left everyone speechless. As the crowd watched, Trump reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his personal notepad. He scribbled something quickly and handed it to the elderly woman. "Take this," he said, his voice calm yet resolute. The woman looked at the paper, confused. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a handwritten note with the address of a shelter in the city. "They'll give you a place to stay," Trump explained. "Tell them I sent you. If anyone gives you trouble, have them call this number." She blinked her weathered hands, trembling as she held the note. I don't understand," she stammered. "Why are you doing this for me?" Trump sighed, a rare glimpse of vulnerability flickering in his eyes. "When I was young, my father taught me something I'll never forget: if you can make someone's life a little better, even for a moment, you do it. No excuses." The crowd grew silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Even the security detail, usually stone-faced, seemed moved by the unexpected display of compassion. But just as the moment seemed to settle, an onlooker stepped forward, a man with a scruffy beard and a hostile glare. "Is this some kind of publicity stunt?" he shouted, his voice dripping with skepticism. Trump stood up slowly, his expression unreadable. "Does it matter?" he said, his tone firm. "If helping someone is a stunt, then maybe more people should start pulling stunts like this." The crowd murmured in agreement, but the tension lingered. The man wasn't done. "You think one act of kindness changes anything? People like her are forgotten the second you drive away." Trump took a step closer to the man, his gaze steady. "You're right," he said. "One act doesn't change the world, but it can change her world, and that's a start." The man, caught off guard by the response, didn't say another word. Instead, he melted back into the crowd, leaving everyone to process what they had just witnessed. Turning back to the woman, Trump gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone," he said softly. "Remember that." Then, without another word, he stepped back into his Cadillac one. The motorcade roared to life, inching forward, but not before Trump glanced back through the tinted window. The woman stood there, clutching the note and blanket, tears streaming down her face. But just when the motorcade turned the corner, something unexpected happened. The elderly woman began to run not away, but toward the car, waving her hand frantically. The security team signaled to stop, unsure of what was going on. When they rolled down the window, what she said shocked everyone yet again. The window lowered, and Trump leaned slightly forward, his brow furrowing in curiosity. "What is it?" he asked, his tone patient yet intrigued. "I can't take this," she gasped, her voice quivering with urgency. "There are so many others out there like me, people who need more help than I do. I've managed to get by for years. This should go to someone who can't." A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Even the guards, accustomed to shielding Trump from every kind of interaction, exchanged incredulous glances. The woman's selflessness was unexpected, and it struck a chord with everyone present. Trump's expression softened as he stepped out of the car again, his towering frame almost protective now. "Ma'am," he said gently, "it's not about who needs it more, it's about doing what's right when you can." "But why me?" she asked, her voice breaking as tears welled up in her eyes. "Why not someone younger, someone who still has a chance to make something of their life?" Trump shook his head, his voice unwavering. "Because you deserve dignity, no matter your age. And because every life matters, especially when the world seems to forget it." The woman's tears fell freely now, and the crowd began to clap softly, the sound growing louder as the message of the moment sank in. But the story wasn't done yet. Trump turned to his chief security officer and gestured toward the press team in the motorcade. "Get me a list of shelters, food banks, and support programs in this area," he instructed. "If there are people slipping through the cracks, we need to make sure they're seen." The press team nodded and immediately began working on their phones and laptops, contacting local organizations. Trump looked back at the woman and said, "You've reminded me of something important today. Sometimes it's not about fixing everything. It's about starting somewhere." The crowd's applause grew louder, but amidst the cheers, a voice rang out from the back. "This should be on every news channel." Cameras began to zoom in on the scene, journalists scrambling to capture every detail. Just as Trump prepared to leave, the woman stepped forward again, her voice steady now. "Thank you," she said, "not just for this, but for showing the world that kindness still exists." Trump nodded, but as he turned to leave, the woman called out one final time, her words stopping him in his tracks. "Wait. There's something I need to tell you about myself. Something you need to know before you go." The tension rose again, and the crowd leaned in, hanging on her every word. What she revealed next sent shockwaves through everyone present. The woman hesitated, her frail hands clutching the edge of her tattered coat. Her voice wavered as she spoke, but her words were laced with an unexpected weight. "My name is Eleanor Sanders," she began, pausing to steady herself. "You probably don't remember me, Mr. Trump, but years ago, I worked for your family. I was one of the housekeepers at your father's estate." Trump's brows knit together as he searched his memory, trying to place her face in the mosaic of his past. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, and the press leaned forward, cameras and microphones capturing every syllable. "I used to clean your room when you were just a boy," she continued, her voice steadying. "I watched you grow up, running through those halls with your siblings, dreaming big. Even back then." Trump's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition dawning in his eyes. "Eleanor. I think I do remember you," he said slowly. "You always hummed that tune. What was it? Moon River, wasn't it?" The woman's lips curved into a faint smile, her eyes glistening. "That's right. You used to ask me to sing it whenever you couldn't sleep." The crowd, previously abuzz with speculation, fell into an almost reverent silence. The moment was steeped in nostalgia, a bridge connecting the powerful figure Trump had become to the boy he once was. But then, one day, Eleanor's tone darkened. "I was let go," she said, her voice trembling. "No explanation. No warning. I begged for my job back. I had kids to feed, but no one would listen." Her voice cracked, and she took a deep breath before continuing. "That was the beginning of my downfall. Losing that job set off a chain of events that brought me here, to the streets." The weight of her story hung in the air like a heavy fog. Trump's jaw tightened, and for the first time, the man known for his unflappable demeanor seemed genuinely shaken. "I'm not blaming you," Eleanor said quickly, as if reading his thoughts. "You were just a kid back then, but I always wondered, did anyone even tell you? Did anyone ever let you know what happened to me?" Trump's voice was barely above a whisper. "No," he said, shaking his head. "I had no idea." The crowd watched intently as the two stood there, their shared history unfolding like a long-lost chapter of a book. Trump finally broke the silence, his voice firm yet tinged with emotion. "Eleanor, I can't change the past, but I can make sure you don't spend another night on the streets. You deserve better than this." He turned to his staff, his tone authoritative now. "Get her whatever she needs, a place to stay, medical care, anything. And find out if there are others like her who've slipped through the cracks because of us." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but before she could speak, Trump added, "And one more thing. I want you to come to Mar-a-Lago. You'll always have a place there, just like before." The crowd erupted in applause, but the moment wasn't over. Eleanor hesitated, her face a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible, "but there's one more thing you need to know." Trump turned back, his eyes narrowing in curiosity. "What is it?" he asked. Eleanor drew a shaky breath, the weight of her revelation evident in her trembling frame. "It's not just me," she said. "There are others. People who worked for your family, people who've been forgotten. They're out there too, just like me." Her words sent a ripple through the crowd. Trump's expression hardened with resolve. "Then let us find them," he said simply. "Every single one of them." The applause was deafening now, but even as the crowd cheered, a sense of anticipation lingered in the air. The story wasn't just about Eleanor anymore, it was about something much larger. And everyone knew the next chapter would be even more extraordinary. The crowd began to disperse, but Eleanor's words hung in the air like a weight that couldn't be ignored. Trump stood in silence for a moment, his gaze fixed on Eleanor, as if he were processing everything she had just said. Then, without warning, he turned to his staff and said, "I want a full list of everyone who worked for my family over the years. Every name, every story, and I want it by tomorrow." His assistant blinked, momentarily stunned by the urgency in his voice, but quickly nodded and got to work. Eleanor looked at him, her expression a mix of hope and disbelief. "Do you really mean that?" she asked softly. Trump met her gaze, his tone steady and sincere. "I do. This isn't just about you, Eleanor. It's about making things right for everyone who was left behind." As he spoke, a young reporter, barely out of journalism school, pushed her way through the crowd. She held a recorder and notepad, her face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Trump," she called out, her voice cutting through the commotion. "Can you comment on what just happened here? This seems different from your usual image." Trump turned to her, his expression unreadable at first, then with a small smile, he said, "Maybe it's time the world saw a different side of me. Everyone has a story, even me. And maybe those stories are more connected than we realize." The reporter nodded, furiously scribbling down notes. "Eleanor's story," she pressed. "What does it mean to you personally?" Trump glanced at Eleanor, his face softening. "It means we have to do better," he said simply. "For her, for everyone." The reporter stepped back, satisfied for now. But the crowd buzzed with new energy. People began to speculate about what this moment might mean, not just for Eleanor, but for Trump's legacy, for politics, and for society at large. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice low. "Mr. Trump, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he replied, his tone firm but kind. "Just promise me one thing." She tilted her head, curious. "What's that?" "If you know where any of the others are, anyone who worked for us, anyone who might need help, you tell me. No one gets left behind." Eleanor nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I will. I promise." But as the motorcade began to prepare for departure, a man stepped forward from the crowd. His face was partially obscured by a worn baseball cap, but his voice was gruff and loud enough to cut through the noise. "Mr. Trump, there's something you should know about Eleanor's story. Something she didn't tell you." The crowd fell silent again. Every eye turned toward the man. Eleanor's face paled. She looked at him with a mix of recognition and dread. Trump stepped forward, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" he asked, his voice calm but commanding. The man hesitated, as if weighing the consequences of his words, then said, "She wasn't just a housekeeper. She was the reason your father avoided a scandal that could have ruined everything." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Trump's expression hardened, 1,000 questions flashing through his eyes. He turned to Eleanor, who looked as if the ground might swallow her whole. "What's he talking about, Eleanor?" Trump asked, his voice quiet but heavy with expectation. Eleanor hesitated, her lips trembling. "I didn't think you needed to know," she whispered. "But maybe it's time you did." And with that, she began to reveal a secret that had been buried for decades, a secret that would change everything Trump thought he knew about his family and himself. The crowd seemed to hold its breath as Eleanor prepared to speak. Her hands trembled, her voice faltered at first, but she steadied herself. "It was over 50 years ago," she began, her gaze locked on Trump. "Your father, Fred Trump, was in deep trouble. A business deal had gone wrong, and someone was threatening to expose him. It wasn't just about money. It was something that could have destroyed your family's reputation forever." Trump's brow furrowed. His curiosity morphed into tense anticipation. "What kind of trouble, Eleanor? What did he do?" Eleanor hesitated, glancing at the man in the baseball cap who gave her a slight nod of encouragement. "There was a worker at one of his construction sites," she continued, "a man who got hurt on the job. Your father's company tried to cover it up, but the man had proof photos, documents. He was ready to go to the press. Trump's jaw tightened. He had heard whispers of his father's controversial dealings before, but never anything like this. "And what does this have to do with you?" he asked, his voice edged with tension. Eleanor took a deep breath, tears welling in her eyes. "The man who got hurt was my husband, James. He was everything to me, and after the accident, he couldn't work. We had nothing." The crowd murmured. The weight of her story settled over them like a heavy fog. "James wanted justice," Eleanor continued, her voice breaking. "But your father came to me personally. He begged me to convince James to drop the case. He said he'd pay us enough to live comfortably for the rest of our lives. I didn't trust him, but I didn't want my children to starve." She paused, wiping her eyes with trembling hands. "So, I agreed. I convinced James to take the deal. Your father paid us, but it wasn't as much as he promised. And then a few months later, James died. The stress, the pain, it was too much for him." Trump's face turned pale. His usual composure cracked under the weight of her words. "Why didn't you say anything before?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor looked at him, her expression a mix of sorrow and resolve. "Because I didn't think it would matter," she said. "Your family had all the power. And what was I, just a poor housekeeper with no one left to fight for her?" The crowd was utterly silent now. The tension was palpable. Trump looked away, his mind racing. When he finally spoke, his voice was laced with both regret and determination. "Eleanor, I'm sorry. I can't change what my father did, but I can make it right for you, for James, for everyone he wronged." He turned to his assistant. "Get a team together. I want every case my father ever settled reviewed, and I want to personally meet with anyone who feels they were cheated or silenced." Eleanor's eyes widened, and the crowd erupted in murmurs of disbelief. The man in the baseball cap stepped forward again. "You mean that?" he asked skeptically. Trump looked him in the eye. "I do. This isn't about politics or image. It's about doing what's right." The man nodded slowly, as if finally believing him. Eleanor, overcome with emotion, reached out and took Trump's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finally listening." As the motorcade prepared to leave, the crowd began to applaud, not just for Eleanor, but for the possibility of redemption, of justice. Trump climbed back into his Cadillac one, but his mind was already spinning with thoughts of the future. The world was changing, and he knew that what had started as a simple act of kindness had become something far more profound. As the car drove away, the weight of the moment lingered. But one thing was certain: the story of Eleanor Sanders, and the truth she had uncovered, would change everything.